Hello, you're watching Daybreak live on A News, and I'm here to take you through the day's top stories. So let's take a look at the headlines. At least 254 people killed after Israel hits Lebanon with a massive wave of airstrikes after US-Iran agree a ceasefire. Iran and the US hold Saturday peace talks hang in the balance after Israeli airstrikes hit Lebanon. A NATO chief says Trump is disappointed with US allies not joining the Iran war. First this morning, after a last-minute temporary ceasefire deal between the US and Iran, Israeli airstrikes have hit Lebanon, killing at least 254 people, with many injured. The ceasefire is at stake, as well as the opening of the Strait of Hormuz, which Iran is threatening to close if Israel continues its strikes. This escalation could further dampen peace talks, which is scheduled to be held in Islamabad on Saturday.
Israeli airstrikes have killed at least 254 people and wounded 1,165 across Lebanon, marking the deadliest escalation since a US-Iran ceasefire was announced. The Israeli military said it carried out large-scale strikes on Wednesday, targeting more than 100 Hezbollah command centers and military sites across Beirut, the Bekaa Valley and southern Lebanon, describing it as its largest operation since the start of the US-Israel war on Iran. It said more than 100 locations were hit in less than 10 minutes as explosions lit up Beirut's southern suburbs, with densely populated areas among the hardest hit. Lebanese President Joseph Aoun condemned the strikes, accusing Israel of violating international law and humanitarian principles, and warning they undermine efforts toward regional stability. Prime Minister Nawaf Salam said Lebanon welcomed the US-Iran ceasefire, but accused Israel of continuing its escalation, calling on the international community to intervene. The escalation has also deepened disputes over the scope of the truce. Iranian officials said the United States and Israel had reneged on the terms, arguing Lebanon should have been included, while Israel maintains the agreement does not apply.
Thankfully at this
US Vice President J.D. Vance said there had been a misunderstanding, noting Iran believed Lebanon was part of the deal. But Washington had not agreed to that.
I think the Iranians thought that the ceasefire included Lebanon, and it just didn't. We never made that promise. We never indicated that was going to be the case. What we said is that the ceasefire would be focused on Iran, and the ceasefire would be focused on America's allies, both Israel and the Gulf Arab states. Now, that said, the Israelis, as I understand it, again, I'm supposed to get a fuller report when I get on the plane, have actually offered to be, frankly, to check themselves a little bit in Lebanon because they want to make sure that our negotiation is successful.
The disagreement has prompted broader international calls to expand the truce.
This is an important step forward. Of course, it is a fragile peace, but we want it to lead to an agreement. The Australian government also firmly believes that this has to apply to Lebanon as well. We want to see peace in this region, and it will make a difference, and I know that many Australians are concerned about the events that are occurring in Lebanon. This is a matter of not just the impact there, but the impact that it's having right around the world.
The United Nations described the wave of strikes as appalling. Oman's foreign ministry also condemned the attacks, calling them war crimes and a violation of international law, and urged global action to hold Israel accountable. The International Committee of the Red Cross said it was outraged by the scale of death and destruction, reporting that heavy explosive weapons struck crowded neighborhoods without effective warnings. It said civilians were rushing to hospitals and searching for missing relatives as conditions worsened. Hezbollah described the strikes as war crimes targeting civilians and said they would strengthen its resolve to continue fighting.
Now let's take a look at the stories shaping the day across the globe, and we head first to the Guardian website that's also leading on Iran and has been doing so for a number of hours. It's done a live page, and if we keep scrolling down we'll see some of what these pictures are. But Tehran has agreed to temporarily reopening the strait as part of a 2-week truce that was announced yesterday in regards to the US and Iran coming together, and they issued a map to guide ships through alternative routes for travelling through the Strait of Hormuz due to the sea mines. But that truce is very fragile right now. As you heard in our first report, Israel's ongoing strikes on Lebanon are actually threatening the agreement. And as you saw there, US President J.D. Vance said he thought the Iranians thought that the ceasefire included Lebanon, and it just didn't, is what he said. But Iran, which said Lebanon was included in the ceasefire, has accused the US of not upholding its end of the deal. And Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said Washington had to choose between a ceasefire or a continued war via Israel, and they cannot have both. So it's something that is very, very fragile at this moment. But Pakistan, which mediated the truce between the two countries, said the deal covered Lebanon, a claim disputed by the White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt. But a number of people, international leaders, have actually put calls out. So you just saw there, that was Anthony Albanese, the Prime Minister of Australia, and now Emmanuel Macron has also told Trump and Iran's president the ceasefire must include Lebanon as well. Now, we do know that Vance will be travelling with a delegation to Pakistan, to Islamabad this weekend with a special envoy, including Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. And in a briefing for reporters, Caroline Leavitt, who is the Washington press secretary, said the ceasefire between the US and Iran had created an opening that could be the start of a long-lasting peace in the region. However, this is currently hanging in the balance because of what's taking place in Lebanon. Now, let's stay on this because we need to go to the next story, which is on the New York Times, and that's in relation to what's been going on in Lebanon overnight. Now, Israel has carried out one of the largest wave of airstrike attacks, as we mentioned in the headline, killing at least 254 people, and that number is definitely likely to rise. As you can see there, these airstrikes. Now, this happened on Wednesday throughout the day, and this is why the numbers we're now receiving and is likely to go up. It started at around 184, and now that has doubled, which to what we're now seeing roughly taking place now. So it's being reported as the largest coordinated strike against Hezbollah since the war began, prompting warnings Iran could actually pull out of the ceasefire, and that number is likely to rise. Now, the Red Cross has said it is outraged by the devastating death and destruction in a densely populated area across Lebanon, and say the attacks has happened after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office denied that the ceasefire covered the conflict in Lebanon. So we are going to continue basically figuring out what this actually means. Now, we do know that Washington has said that it was not part of the deal either, so they're going back and forth in regards to this. Pakistan says it was part of that deal, and they're the ones that helped to mediate this particular deal. In relation to that, we know that over 1.2 million people have actually been displaced since the beginning of the war with Iran and the US and Israel, and 1 in 5, that's 1 in 5 of the population, most of them from the Shia Muslim communities, have been displaced. So we will be bringing you as much information in relation to that and what Iran's position will be, and whether or not the ceasefire will be extended to Lebanon in the coming days. Okay, now let's move to our next headline, and that's on the BBC, and that's in regards to the late Matthew Perry. The CNN, website, the BBC, CNN's website. So, ketamine queen sentenced in Matthew Perry case, highlighting a new era of accountability for drug dealers. So, a woman dubbed the ketamine Queen has been sentenced to 15 years in prison for selling drugs that led to the death of the Friends actor Matthew Perry. So her name, this lady here that you can see, is Jasveen Sangha. She pleaded guilty last September to 5 charges, including 1 count of distributing ketamine resulting in death or bodily injury. Now, Prosecutors described the American-British dual national citizen of North Hollywood's home as a drug-selling emporium, saying she sold a range of drugs to wealthy and well-connected clients. Actor Matthew Perry has struggled with an addiction for years and was found dead in his home in his own hot tub in October 2023. Now, investigators determined his death was caused by the acute effects of ketamine. And just to describe exactly what is the drug, ketamine is a dissociative anesthetic that has some hallucinogenic effects and is supposed to be administered only by a physician. Now, the judge has said she must answer for her crimes, noting that she had shown no remorse in the years since her arrest. And as I mentioned, Matthew Perry, the late actor, has struggled with decades of substance addiction and had been taking ketamine as part of supervised therapy for his depression. Okay, now we go to our next website, and that is the BBC this time, and this is in regards to, I reported on this 2 days ago. So basically, Germany suspends military approval for long stays abroad for men under 45. So Germany's Defence Minister Boris Pistorius says men of military age in Germany no longer need to report about their lengthy stays abroad. Now, his statement actually comes, this is why it's quite crucial, his statement comes after controversy broke out over the possible consequences of a new law which reintroduced military service in Germany. Now, the Military Service Modernisation Act, which came into force on the 1st of January this year, aims to boost defences following threats from Russia in the aftermath of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Now, the requirement to obtain permission had gone largely unnoticed until it was actually reported by a German newspaper on Friday of last week. It was then picked up by a number of different outlets, and obviously there was a number of backlash from those German citizens in regards to that, but it was not to have been believed to be actually applied yet. Now, Boris Pistorius has told the German press agency that he is introducing an exemption to this. He said whether they are 17 or 45 or anywhere in between, everyone is of course free to travel and currently does not need permission to do so. He also said that lengthy stays abroad will not need to be reported either during this peacetime period. There will be no permission procedures, and they are making sure that they suspend the permission requirement as long as a military service is voluntary. So just to bring you up to date in regards to that piece of information there. Well, that was the press roundup for now. I'm now going to take a quick break, but when I return, I'll discuss the rest of the global stories, so don't go anywhere. Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak. Now let's have a look at the rest of the global stories this morning. Diplomatic efforts are intensifying ahead of US-Iran talks in Islamabad this Saturday. The UN Secretary-General has warned that ongoing Israeli attacks on Lebanon possess a grave risk to the fragile US-Iran truce. Let's take a look at this report.
US and Iranian delegations are set to meet in Islamabad for ceasefire talks as Washington pushes to turn a temporary truce into a broader agreement. The US negotiating team, led by Vice President J.D. Vance, is being dispatched by Donald Trump following mediation efforts by Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif. Uncertainty also surrounds the Strait of Hormuz. While some ship movement has resumed, restrictions remain in place, and vessels may still require approval from Iranian authorities to pass. Speaking in Hungary, Vance described the ceasefire as fragile, saying progress depends on both sides negotiating in good faith. He warned the United States is prepared to resume military action if diplomacy fails. Analysts also warn that even if the ceasefire holds, the economic impact of the conflict could be severe.
If the war really ends now, if the ceasefire sticks and we're able to see a beginning of reconstruction of the damage that's been done in the region, I think we might end up looking at a total economic cost of about, let's say, 20% of the global pandemic. So very significant, but something that we'll be able to live through in a year's time, for example.
Despite the 2-week ceasefire agreement, the situation on the ground remains unstable, with continued violence reported in parts of the region. Iran claims that 3 key clauses of a proposed 10-point framework had already been violated ahead of the talks, including continued fighting in Lebanon, an alleged drone incursion into Iranian airspace, and disputes over uranium enrichment. Meanwhile, the White House says Iran has abandoned its unacceptable plan and submitted a more workable proposal, while President Trump maintains firm demands, including ending uranium enrichment.
President Trump and the team determined the new modified plan was a workable basis on which to negotiate and to align it with our own 15-point proposal. The president's red lines, namely the end of uranium enrichment in Iran, have not changed. And the idea that President Trump would ever accept an Iranian wish list as a deal is completely absurd. The president will only make a deal that serves in the best interests of the United States of America, and he as a negotiating team will focus on this effort over the next 2 weeks, so long as the Strait of Hormuz remains open with no limitations or delays.
With both sides maintaining firm positions, the outcome of the talks remains uncertain.
Turning to Gaza, and an Israeli airstrike has killed 4 people, including a journalist. That's according to local health authorities. Officials say a drone attack in Gaza City hit a vehicle, killing Al Jazeera journalist Mohammed Wishar and another person. Israel previously accused Wishar of links to Hamas, citing material it was seized in Gaza. But both Hamas and Al Jazeera rejected the allegation. The Committee to Protect Journalists says more than 220 media workers have been killed across Gaza, Lebanon and Israel since October 2023. Turning back to the Middle East, and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer arrived in Saudi Arabia on Wednesday as part of a visit to the Gulf allies to discuss efforts to support and uphold the ceasefire agreement. He said fully reopening the vital shipping route to restore oil and gas supplies would help stabilise prices across the globe and in the UK. He added there was a sense of relief following the ceasefire, but he acknowledged it was early days. His comments come after Israel held its largest attack on Lebanon, fracturing terms in the deal, which Israel says does not include Lebanon. Tensions are rising between the US and NATO after President Donald Trump criticized the alliance's limited role during the Iran conflict and signaled possible consequences for some member states. Our US correspondent sent this.
The Trump administration has blasted the North Atlantic Treaty Organization for not supporting the U.S. during Operation Epic Fury, a military campaign against Iran's missile and nuclear development program that has largely seen NATO on the sidelines. New reports suggest that the Trump administration is considering to punish some NATO members deemed unhelpful during the Iran war, including potentially relocating U.S. military bases from Europe. White House spokeswoman Caroline Leavitt on Wednesday said that President Trump believes that NATO was tested and they failed during the Iran war. That's according to the White House. The increased tensions with NATO come as President Trump and NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte met at the White House. Rutte is known for having a warm relationship with Trump, but the president has been increasingly publicly critical of NATO. In recent weeks, Trump has called NATO a, quote, paper tiger that is unhelpful in times of need. Asked by a reporter earlier this month about withdrawing from the alliance, Trump said, "Wouldn't you if you were me?" Trump's conversation with Rutte was described by officials as being, quote, very frank and candid. Trump has called for countries that depend on oil from the Arabian Gulf region to break Iran's chokehold on the Strait of Hormuz. But European countries are unlikely to join mine clearing or other such missions to free up navigations as long as hostilities continue, according to diplomats. During their private meeting, Rutte expressed a shared interest in restoring normal maritime trade after the conflict caused energy prices to spike globally. The NATO Secretary General is believed to have also highlighted steps that European member states are taking in increasing their defense spending. That's something that Trump has repeatedly been pushing for NATO allies to do more when it comes to burden sharing. Meanwhile, the Trump administration is reportedly considering pulling U.S. troops from NATO allies that refused to support the Iran military campaign and redeploying them to countries that backed U.S. military efforts. I'm Ube Shabander, A News, Washington.
Staying on the war in Iran, U.S. lawmakers are renewing efforts to limit President Donald Trump's military actions against Iran as political divisions deepen in Washington. Senate Democrat leader Chuck Schumer says a vote next week will seek approval for any further strikes. The push follows a 2-week ceasefire announced by Trump hours after warning Tehran over the Strait of Hormuz. Schumer called the approach unhinged, saying it has failed to curb Iran's nuclear program and driven up fuel prices. The White House says Trump acted within his authority, while Republicans back his policy. Russia has threatened Baltic countries over potential drone flights after Ukraine targeted Russian ports, disrupting oil exports. Russia's foreign ministry warned that countries allowing enemy drones to use their territory must be aware of the risks. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky criticized the US for overlooking evidence that Russia has been helping Iran target American bases. In an interview, Zelensky said he tried to alert Washington, but officials trust Putin. He added that Trump negotiators visited Moscow 5 times last year without meeting any Ukrainian officials and misunderstood Russia's intentions. Turning to Europe, and Greece is preparing to restrict access to social media for children under the age of 15. The government says the move is necessary to protect young people's mental health. The decision has sparked mixed reactions, with some supporting the measure and others questioning its effectiveness.
Greece is preparing to ban access to social media for children under the age of 15. The measure will come into force next year.
Science is clear. When a child spends hours in front of a screen, the mind does not rest. That's why we have decided to move forward with something difficult but necessary, to ban access to social media for children under 15. The regulation will be introduced during the summer of 2026 and will come into force on January 1st, 2027. Greece will be among the first countries to take such an initiative. However, I am certain it will not be the last. Our aim is also to push the European Union in this direction.
Mobile phone use has already been banned in schools, and parental control tools have been introduced for teenagers.
As an idea, it seems good to me because young people do not yet have the maturity to judge which of the stimuli they receive is true or not, which will be useful to them and which may harm them.
It should be noted that Australia was the first country to introduce restrictions on social media for users under the age of 16. The ban covers platforms such as TikTok, YouTube, Instagram and Facebook. Technology companies Meta, Snapchat and TikTok have expressed doubts about the effectiveness of such bans, but say they will comply with the rules. Under the new regulations, platforms that fail to enforce user restrictions could face significant financial penalties under the Digital Services Act. Greece's parliament is expected to pass the legislation in mid-2026. Discussions on tightening social media regulations are also ongoing in other countries.
Now, outside of the Earth, a historic journey to the far side of the Moon is coming to an end, with 4 astronauts on board the Artemis II now heading home after pushing the boundaries of human spaceflight and exploration.
To my esteemed 4 astronauts on board the Artemis II mission are now on their way back to Earth after a historic journey around the far side of the Moon, marking the first mission of its kind in 50 years. The crew, NASA astronauts Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover and Christina Koch, alongside Canadian astronaut Jeremy Hansen, launched from Florida last week. Just a few days later, they reached the Moon, flying past its shadowed far side and becoming the most distant humans ever to travel in space. There have also been lighter moments along the way. including a call with Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, who spoke with the crew about their experiences and what they've learned, and said Canadians are very proud.
As I say, Canadians are so proud of what you're doing and the collaboration, and I just want to have a chance, if I may. I'm thrilled. I'm absolutely thrilled to be speaking with you, Jeremy, and the crew. We've all been watching and inspired by what you're doing. And
Prime Minister, I did want to
during the call, Canadian astronaut Jeremy Hansen held up a national flag bearing the Prime Minister's title to the cameras.
So I wrote your name on the back, well, your title on the back.
Earlier in the week, during a 6-hour flyby, the astronauts broke a record set by the Apollo 13 mission, reaching around 252,000 miles from Earth, about 4,000 miles farther than any crew before. On flight day 7, as they began heading home, the crew linked up with astronauts aboard the International Space Station, describing their unique view of the moon while capturing remarkable images during the lunar flyby. NASA says the Orion spacecraft remains in good condition, with all systems running smoothly as the crew makes their return journey. Back on Earth, scientists have been closely monitoring every stage, analyzing both live and recorded communication to better understand the moon and the wider solar system. The mission is part of NASA's wider Artemis program, a multi-billion-dollar effort designed to return humans to the moon by 2028, before China, and to build a lasting American presence there over the next decade. The astronauts are expected to return on Friday evening, splashing down off the coast of California after nearly 10 days in space. Their return will mark the end of a landmark mission, and another major step towards sending humans deeper into space.
Some amazing pictures from their space exploration. Now let's turn to a US story and a US architect who murdered 7 women and admitted killing an 8th in a string of unsolved crimes known as the Gilgo Beach killings has pleaded guilty. 62-year-old Rex Hummerman entered the pleas in a courtroom packed with reporters, police and victims' relatives. He also admitted the killing of an 8th woman called Karen Vergata, who disappeared in 1996. He'll be sentenced in June to life in prison without the possibility of parole. A major fire engulfed the roof of the Olympic Park velodrome in Rio de Janeiro's Olympic Park. Fire officials said the blaze was brought under control early on Wednesday morning, with no injuries reported and no risk of spreading to other parts of the complex. Emergency crews were called to the scene and around 80 firefighters and 20 fire engines deployed to tackle the blaze. The velodrome was built for the 2016 Rio Olympics. Now to a story that is somewhat unusual, but would you ever consider eating soil? Well, in London, visitors are being invited to do exactly that as it explores a practice rooted in cultures around the world. Let's take a look at this.
The Museum of Edible Earth is inviting London visitors to sample an unusual delicacy that it said has been part of cultures around the world for centuries: earth itself. Somerset House is hosting the exhibition, which explores geophagy, the practice of eating earth for health, ritual, and culinary purposes. Artist and researcher Masharu has collected over 600 samples of soil, chalk, and mineral-rich earths from 44 countries. The museum's room features a tasting table in the center, where visitors can eat 2 edible samples, including Luvos healing earth from Germany and diatomaceous earth from Mexico. Before tasting, staff explain the stories behind the samples, where they come from, why they are consumed, and any perceived benefits. Curator Kinari Saraya said that there are a number of reasons why people eat earth and included it in their daily routines.
So there's different reasons, and different reasons that have been documented across different geographies. Some of it is to do with cravings of pregnant women. Some of it's to do with medicinal reasons, religious reasons, for digestion as well. And it's quite similar to how we think about soil and vegetables, because they're all kind of growing as part of the same ecosystem. So it's well documented across different cultures and religions to actually have this earth in their daily routines.
Visitors are encouraged to record their tasting impressions on compostable cards, helping to build an archive of experiences.
My relationship with I guess, clay, I didn't really know why we did it when I was back in Cameroon, but coming out of there and doing a little bit of research, I think it helps. So Cameroon is a pretty underdeveloped country, and I think a lot of areas struggle to find food, basically. So I think eating a little bit of clay helps kind of suppress the hunger and the famine sometimes, and it keeps you going for ages.
I think how normal it was. I expected it to be something kind of crazy, very crunchy, very different, but it really was a normal food experience. The taste wasn't drastically different, and also just realizing how I can put it into everyday life. It's a lot more simple than what I thought.
Museum of Edible Earth has been presented in more than 22 countries and will run in London until 26th April.
That is very interesting. I don't know whether or not I could try to do that. I couldn't. I'm sorry. I've thought about it, but it's a bit too difficult. We're going to take a quick break now. When I return, I will be joined by a regional guest to go through some of the key headlines taking place this region. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, and thank you for joining me this morning. Now let's head over to the region and to find out a number of key stories there. We head first to Azerbaijan, and the Azerbaijan-Armenia normalization process has entered a critical phase, marked by formal progress alongside ongoing geopolitical and domestic challenges. In this context, Azerbaijan maintains its focus on a bilateral results-orientated approach grounded in territorial integrity and long-term stability in the South Caucasus. Joining me now to dig further into this is Tural Ganjali, Member of Parliament from the Khankandi city. Welcome this morning.
Thank you very much for having me.
My first question in regards to this is, how might the implementation phase of the peace agreement reshape practical realities on the ground, particularly in relation to the border delimitation and connectivity?
Yeah, it's a very important question because last year in August we have initial peace draft treaty with Armenia in Washington, and now a very good momentum, positive development has taken place since last year, and we have to keep forward and pursue this positive development in order to finally sign the peace treaty. And as you have mentioned, there are some issues on the agenda that we are negotiating with Armenian side. It's first of all delimitation and demarcation process, which is not completed yet, and I hope that it will be completed in near future. And of course, another important issue is that already transport and communication links are opened and functioning very well. As you may know, as Russia sends its goods and some wheat products to Armenia via Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan also provided Armenia with some oil and gas products, which is very essential for Armenian economy. So it seems that we have very positive momentum, at least since the end of the war. And not only the diplomats and negotiations are taking place, diplomats are speaking, also economic, this development is very important for us, because with the opening of the communication links, also in the future with the opening of the border lines, of course, Azerbaijan and Armenia will be engaged in a very positive trade turnover. Trade volume will increase, of course, and already we are seeing very positive kind of signals coming from both sides.
Wow, okay. And to what extent then can Armenia maintain internal political stability while advancing commitments made within that peace process?
Yeah, I think that Armenia, I hope that will maintain its commitment to peace process. We have very important developments. We will see Armenia in June. This summer we will have elections in Armenia, and it's very important that Armenia keeps the peace process intact. No matter who gets elected in Armenia, I do hope that it will not affect negatively the peace process, because geography is our fate. We will be living here as neighbors for many centuries. So that's why we have to transform South Caucasus. We are already transforming South Caucasus from a place of confrontation to a place of collaboration. We need this collaboration. We need this cooperation. That's why Azerbaijan has always come up with the peace agenda. We are pursuing this peace agenda not only with Armenia, with all of our neighbors. And recently, the president of Azerbaijan paid very important, just 2 days ago, very important visit to Georgia. It means that the South Caucasus, the priority of Azerbaijani foreign policy is to make sure that South Caucasus has always be a place where the peace process, peace agenda, cooperation, collaboration takes place.
Right. And what implications does the evolving Armenia-Russian relationship have for the balance of power in the South Caucasus now?
Yeah, this is also a very important question, because recently we have seen a very tremendous shift in the relations between Russia and Armenia. Recently, our Russian-Armenian relations have deteriorated. We also very closely following what is happening between these countries, because these are countries, our immediate neighbors, Russia on the one side and Armenia on the another side. And very important developments took place while the Prime Minister Pashinyan paid a visit to Moscow. A very important meeting took place between Putin and Pashinyan. We have seen some, constraint between these leaders. Of course, first of all, this constraint comes from the issue from the Russian perspective that Armenia is trying to pursue more European EU pro-EU policy, which is going against Russian interests. That's why they have this clash taking place. But Armenia is a very independent, sovereign country. Armenia is trying to pursue a policy which suits its domestic, its foreign strategy in the South Caucasus. That's why we would like to see these problems resolved between these countries. But a very important issue is also the pre-election situation in Armenia. Russia has leverage. Russia would like to leverage in the place in Armenia in order to to push Armenia, to keep Armenia under pressure, that Russian interests get protected in Armenia. But again, Armenia is a sovereign country, is an independent country, and we would like to see independent sovereign Armenia conducting its elections freely without any intervention.
Well, just on that then, especially in regards to Armenia's pre-election dynamics, could that influence its relationship and consistency dialogue, basically just continuing its dialogue with Azerbaijan during this pre-election phase?
Yes, I think that without any kind of, no matter what happens to elections, what happens to Russian-Armenian relations, I think that Azerbaijani-Armenian dialogue must continue. This is really, one of the most important positive moments. I would say the only positive moment in the South Caucasus is the relations between Armenia and Azerbaijan, because, we have been able to turn this impasse, the geographic constraint, into our advantage. This is a most important issue that we have to value. I think that Armenia understands this. Also, Russia must understand this aspect, because for centuries, unfortunately, the big empires, the Russian Empire, for example, have used, these nations in the region against each other. That's why we have to stop here, and we have to prefer collaboration again, because as long as we collaborate, as long as we have common interests coinciding, it's better for everybody, for all nations in the South Caucasus. And of course, we will have some disagreements in the region, because different national interests, different countries, but let's agree to disagree. That we will have some disagreements, but we don't have to wear boxing gloves. We have to resolve these conflictual issues by peaceful means, by dialogue, by conducting diplomatic negotiations.
Yes, no. So I just want to bring something to your attention. How should a statement then made by Alen Simoyan, he stated that if the price of Russian gas increases, Armenia will leave the Collective Security Treaty Organization and the Eurasian Economic Union. How do we interpret that alongside what Vladimir Putin's warning has been, that it is impossible for Armenia to remain simultaneously both in the EU and in Eurasian Economic Union? What does that tell us about that relationship?
Yeah, this is a very important aspect, because Russia would like to leverage Armenia, especially a very sensitive topic is the price to energy in Armenia. Russia would like to see Armenia dependent on Russia, because of Armenia doesn't have independent source of income, independent source of petrol, oil and gas. And that's why Putin, in his meeting with Pashinyan, Putin stated that Armenia cannot have simultaneously two double membership in Eurasian, in EU-oriented organization and Eurasian Custom Union or Eurasian Economic Union, which is, dependent on Russia. That's why I think that it is again pre-election, I would say, blackmail from Russian side towards Armenia. But here I don't consider that Armenia will make a decision to exit from Collective Security Treaty Organization or from Eurasian Economic Union, because it would be, very big blow to Armenia-Russia relations, and it would jeopardize Armenia's existence, jeopardize Armenia's national interest. That's why I think that Alen Simonyan, the Speaker of the Parliament of Armenia, is trying just to push with very harsh statements, putting Russia on its place. But I don't think, and I don't expect that Armenia will actually exit these organizations. It would be a tremendous escalation between these countries. Here we see, standard diplomatic battle fight between Russia and Armenia. Pre-election campaign started already. Actually, Pashinyan, by the way, very positively started this campaign, and it seemed that he was ready to take on Putin and on Russia during his visit in Moscow, in Kremlin. Yes.
Well, I'm sure it's something we're definitely looking into. My final question is that what are the long-term then prospects for transforming the South Caucasus into a stable and cooperative geopolitical space?
Yeah, it's a very good question. For centuries, South Caucasus has been a battleground between big empires. Unfortunately, South Caucasian nations have suffered a lot, but now we have a amazing, tremendous opportunity, window of opportunity emerged in the South Caucasus, especially after solving Armenian-Azerbaijani conflict. Just naturally what's happening around us. On the north, we have war going on between Russia and Ukraine. On the south, in the Middle East, we have a very critical situation around Iran. But the only, place of stability and the only place of prosperous geography is South Caucasus. So we have to utilize this opportunity, this window of opportunity, to push more for the peace, for the development in the South Caucasus. South Caucasus is not only about the geography; it's a place where transport and communication links pass from east to west, from north to south. Very tremendous, very amazing time, and we must follow these developments, and we make sure that South Caucasus becomes the very important place in the world global politics.
Yes, and it's definitely looking like that, especially with Azerbaijan and Armenia relations, as well as what's going on with Georgia and the EU's interest in this particular area. Why do you think that it's key then for other actors like China, Russia, the EU to notice that the South Caucasus is actually quite a key instrument?
Yeah, South Caucasus is a key instrument because the biggest projects that currently we have especially in the Eurasian geography, is passing through South Caucasus. EU has its interest in the South Caucasus. The 1/3 of EU members already signed memorandum of strategic understanding cooperation with Azerbaijan. China is very interested in having stable South Caucasus. This middle corridor and its component of Zengezur corridor is very essential for China. China would like to see its goods reaching Europe without any difficulties, without any war places. And that's why it's also very important for China. By the way, very important aspect I forgot to mention earlier. Before visiting before visiting Russia, Prime Minister Pashinyan, on the 31st of March, just one day before going to Moscow, he met with the newly appointed Chief of Mission of EU in Armenia.
Yes.
And it gave very impetus, a very strong message that EU is also trying to have a good say in the region, and EU, I think that in the foreseeable future, EU will increase its role and position in the Armenia, but also, of course, taking into account Azerbaijan is a very strong player. EU and other political centers will have to agree and will have to negotiate with Azerbaijan the fate of the South Caucasus, the fate of our region, because we are the #1 strong country in the South Caucasus. More than 85% of economy of the South Caucasus belongs to Azerbaijan. This is a very key, important factor.
Yes, wow. Well, thank you so much for your time, Mr. Ganjali, in relation to this. It's been so insightful, and our audience has definitely been educated with that. Thank you. Now let's turn to Turkey. And Turkey is setting out an ambitious new target for defence exports, with President Recep Tayyip Erdogan signalling a major push to strengthen the country's position in the global market and for the years ahead. Here are the details.
President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said Tuesday that Turkey hopes to be among the world's top 10 exporters of defense technology within the coming 2 years. Erdogan was speaking at the inauguration of a new missile production facility operated by Turkish defense firm Roketsan. According to the Turkish leader, Ankara has set an $11 billion target for defense and aerospace exports by the year 2028. Turkish defense exports have grown significantly in recent years, supported by stepped-up investments in the domestic technology field. Speaking to reporters, Erdogan noted that defense technology exports had risen from $248 million in 2002 to more than $10 billion last year. In the first quarter of 2026, he said, the country's total defense and aerospace exports rose by 12% year-on-year to more than $1.9 billion. Within the past decade, Turkey has emerged as a major exporter of high-tech defense systems, including unmanned aerial vehicles, naval platforms, and electronic warfare technologies. Turkish-built drones, particularly the Bayraktar TB2, gained international attention after playing a significant role in Azerbaijan's military victory over Armenia in 2020. In a related development, Roketsan CEO Murat Ikinci on Tuesday announced a $3 billion infrastructure expansion plan. The initiative aims to boost domestic missile production and strengthen space launch capabilities. According to Akinci, the company recently completed the first $1 billion phase of the project, which includes a $450 million fuel production facility in the Turkish city of Kırıkkale. Officials say the new infrastructure is expected to significantly increase Turkey's missile fuel output and support future space and defense programs. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Now over to Afghanistan, and meanwhile, diplomatic efforts to ease tensions between Afghanistan and Pakistan are continuing, with China playing an increasingly active role in bringing the two sides closer together. A News' Tamim Bahis has more.
According to Afghanistan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Chinese Ambassador Zhao Xing met Foreign Minister Amir Khan Muttaqi on Tuesday, where the two sides discussed relations between Kabul and Beijing, the wider regional situation, and the ongoing talks in China. The Chinese ambassador said Beijing is working to build trust between Afghanistan and Pakistan through a neutral and cooperative approach, and expressed hope that despite the region's sensitive geopolitical situation, the process would continue with goodwill and without violence. For his part, Muttaqi thanked China for organizing and hosting the talks in Urumqi, and also acknowledged earlier mediation efforts by Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Qatar, and the UAE. The Afghan foreign minister further added that Kabul's position on conflict is defensive, describing the protection of Afghan territory as a legitimate right, while also reaffirming Kabul's commitment to dialogue. These latest talks come after previous mediation attempts failed to produce a breakthrough, and after deadly border clashes increased tensions between the two neighbors. While reports of incidents have not completely stopped, the Urumqi negotiations have raised cautious hopes that diplomacy may still help prevent further escalation. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
And just on that particular story, China has just announced that Afghanistan and Pakistan have agreed to explore a comprehensive solution to the conflict. So that information has also just come out. So we'll make sure we'll bring you an updated version of the talks that is taking place. Now to a quick break. When I return, I'll have a full update on the latest headlines, plus a look at what's making the front pages this morning. Stay with me. Hello, you're watching Daybreak live on A News, and if you're just joining me, I'm your host Nadia Jani, here to take you through the day's top stories. So let's take a look at the headlines. At least 254 killed after Israel hits Lebanon with massive wave of airstrikes after US-Iran agree ceasefire. Iran and US Saturday peace talks hang in the balance after Israeli airstrikes hit Lebanon. A NATO chief says Trump is disappointed with US allies not joining Iran war. Now let's take a look at the stories making the front pages, and we head first to our A News website. In regards to what's happening in Greece now, they have said that they are going to ban social media access for under 15-year-olds from 2027. So Greece has announced its new plans to do so, becoming the latest European country to restrict children's exposure to online platforms. Now, Greece Prime Minister said the move was aimed at tackling rising anxiety and sleep problems among young people, and described the social media as addictive. Now, the restriction will come into force early next year from January. And just a reminder, this is off the back of what happened last year, December, when Australia became the first country in the world to require TikTok, YouTube, Snapchat and other top sites to remove accounts held by under 16-year-olds or face heavy fines. Now, we also know that France, UK, Austria and Spain are among a growing number of European nations pursuing similar restrictions. So we'll definitely keep you up to date with that. But Greece seems to be one of the first key nations, European nations, taking its lead from Australia and deciding that it is also going to limit and restrict its use of social media for its teenagers in the country. Now let's move to the next headline, and that's on the Guardian website, and that's in regards to NATO meeting with Trump yesterday evening. So NATO chief says Trump clearly disappointed by US allies' refusal to join Iran war. Now, the Secretary General that you can see here, Mark Rutte, has said that Donald Trump was disappointed that the US's allies had refused to join its war against Iran, and it follows a closed-door meeting held in Washington yesterday. Now, Mark Rutte actually spoke to CNN after his private meeting with the US president, but declined to say directly whether or not Trump has raised a threat to withdraw from the military alliance over the Iran war. But he did describe the exchange as very frank, very open discussion between two good friends. So the meeting between Trump and Rutte came at a very delicate moment. We know that prior to that, a ceasefire had just been agreed between the US and Iran, and there has been a number of criticism escalated in relation to what Trump has been saying for NATO, calling it a paper tiger and suggesting that US may consider leaving NATO member countries ignored because NATO member countries ignored his call for military assistance to help reopen the critical waterway. Now, the closure, which has sent global oil prices soaring, is still something that we are watching heavily, just because the Strait of Hormuz has now temporarily been reopened due to the ceasefire agreement that was held on Wednesday. Now, the press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, has acknowledged what Trump said to Mark Rutte yesterday, but also added that I think it's something the president will be discussing in the next couple of hours in relation to whether or not the US will leave NATO as well in relation to that. But right now, it was just just words and exchanges in regards to his disappointment disappointment, but nothing further in relation to the US leaving NATO. That's as far as we know at this current moment in time. Now let's move over to our next story, and that's in relation to the Iran war, but focusing very much so on what's going on in Lebanon. Now, the New York Times is reporting a live page on this now. Ceasefire tested by confusion over the Strait and strikes on Lebanon. Now, Israel has carried out a large wave of airstrikes across Lebanon, and it has killed at least 254 people and injured many others. Now, we know that this is a wave of strikes which has been reported as the largest coordinated strike against Hezbollah since the war began, which is prompting warnings that Iran could actually pull out of the ceasefire, as they believe that that ceasefire was also to cover what's going on in Lebanon. However, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says that that ceasefire deal does not include Lebanon, so they're able to keep their attacks going. But the Red Cross has said that it was outraged by the devastating death and destruction in Lebanon that took place on Wednesday in relation to that. Now, we do know that Washington has also confirmed what Israel said. Their press secretary said that Lebanon was not part of the deal in relation to the ceasefire, and J.D. Vance has also attributed and confirmed that, saying that Lebanon was not part of the ceasefire deal between the US and Iran. However, we now have a report that we'll go into that provides a little bit more information in relation to our top story this morning.
Israeli airstrikes have killed at least 254 people and wounded 1,165 across Lebanon, marking the deadliest escalation since a US-Iran ceasefire was announced. The Israeli military said it carried out large-scale strikes on Wednesday, targeting more than 100 Hezbollah command centers and military sites across Beirut, the Bekaa Valley and southern Lebanon, describing it as its largest operation since the start of the US-Israel war on Iran. It said more than 100 locations were hit in less than 10 minutes as explosions lit up Beirut's southern suburbs, with densely populated areas among the hardest hit. Lebanese President Joseph Aoun condemned the strikes, accusing Israel of violating international law and humanitarian principles, and warning they undermine efforts toward regional stability. Prime Minister Nawaf Salam said Lebanon welcomed the US-Iran ceasefire, but accused Israel of continuing its escalation, calling on the international community to intervene. The escalation has also deepened disputes over the scope of the truce. Iranian officials said the United States and Israel had reneged on the terms, arguing Lebanon should have been included, while Israel maintains the agreement does not apply.
But we thankfully at this
US Vice President J.D. Vance said there had been a misunderstanding, noting Iran believed Lebanon was part of the deal. But Washington had not agreed to that.
I think the Iranians thought that the ceasefire included Lebanon, and it just didn't. We never made that promise. We never indicated that was going to be the case. What we said is that the ceasefire would be focused on Iran, and the ceasefire would be focused on America's allies, both Israel and the Gulf Arab states. Now, that said, the Israelis, as I understand it, again, I'm supposed to get a fuller report when I get on the plane, have actually offered to be, frankly, to check themselves a little bit in Lebanon because they want to make sure that our negotiation is successful.
The disagreement has prompted broader international calls to expand the truce.
This is an important step forward. Of course, it is a fragile peace, but we want it to lead to an agreement. The Australian government also firmly believes that this has to apply to Lebanon as well. We want to see peace in this region, and it will make a difference, and I know that many Australians are concerned about the events that are occurring in Lebanon. This is a matter of not just the impact there, but the impact that it's having right around the world.
The United Nations described the wave of strikes as appalling. Oman's foreign ministry also condemned the attacks, calling them war crimes and a violation of international law, and urged global action to hold Israel accountable. The International Committee of the Red Cross said it was outraged by the scale of death and destruction, reporting that heavy explosive weapons struck crowded neighborhoods without effective warnings. It said civilians were rushing to hospitals and searching for missing relatives as conditions worsened. Hezbollah described the strikes as war crimes targeting civilians and said they would strengthen its resolve to continue fighting.
And now diplomatic efforts are intensifying ahead of the US-Iran talks in Islamabad this Saturday. The UN Secretary General has warned that ongoing Israeli attacks on Lebanon poses a grave risk to the fragile US-Iran truce.
US and Iranian delegations are set to meet in Islamabad for ceasefire talks as Washington pushes to turn a temporary truce into a broader agreement. The US negotiating team, led by Vice President J.D. Vance, is being dispatched by Donald Trump following mediation efforts by Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif. Uncertainty also surrounds the Strait of Hormuz. While some ship movement has resumed, restrictions remain in place, and vessels may still require approval from Iranian authorities to pass. Speaking in Hungary, Vance described the ceasefire as fragile, saying progress depends on both sides negotiating in good faith. He warned the United States is prepared to resume military action if diplomacy fails. Analysts also warn that even if the ceasefire holds, the economic impact of the conflict could be severe.
If the war really ends now, if the ceasefire sticks and we're able to see a beginning of reconstruction of the damage that's been done in the region, I think we might end up looking at a total economic cost of about, let's say, 20% of the global pandemic. So very significant, but something that we'll be able to live through in a year's time, for example.
Despite the two-week ceasefire agreement, the situation on the ground remains unstable, with continued violence reported in parts of the region. Iran claims that 3 key clauses of a proposed 10-point framework had already been violated ahead of the talks, including continued fighting in Lebanon, an alleged drone incursion into Iranian airspace, and disputes over uranium enrichment. Meanwhile, the White House says Iran has abandoned its unacceptable plan and submitted.
Staying on this topic to further dig into what this could mean for the future end of the war in Iran is Rizvi Osman, founder of Rizvi Insights, joining me this morning. Thank you so much for coming onto the programme.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Well, let's focus really on the elephant in the room. Iran is calling for the fighting to stop, but the US says Lebanon was not included in the ceasefire. Could that have a negative impact on the temporary ceasefire, and could Iran actually pull out of the meeting going to be held this Saturday in Islamabad, which is, where Pakistan has really stepped into all of this?
Well, from one perspective, ceasefires have always tend to be fragile. And this is the case in the recent ceasefire as well. Some are saying that we don't see that holding on for 2 weeks, but at the same time, the talks in Islamabad, I can tell you here in Pakistan, they're real, they're happening. And maybe to have a little bit of optimistic angle on this, maybe the ceasefire violations will continue, but in tandem, there will be talks as well. I don't think Iran is going to pull out, neither the US is going to pull out. However, these ceasefire violations are not because of any confusion or anything. I mean, there is no confusion about not killing civilians, not killing children, not targeting residential buildings, not having any sort of buffer zone for the citizens to move, not having any prior warning for the strikes. So this actually may be one of the tactics to maybe bring Iran back into the war and maybe append all this negotiation process. However, what seems to be happening right now is that the ceasefire/negotiation efforts are real and very pragmatic, and I think we will hear something regarding a long-term agreement, let's call it, by the end of the week.
Well, just on that agreement, Iran has sent over its 10-point plan, as well as the US has also put forward its 15-point plan. Now, both of these plans don't actually align with each other. Could we be stuck in a stalemate between the two countries if there is no compromise on what they're willing to talk about in regards to each plan?
Well, 10, 15, 20, 50, I mean, these are just pointers. Mainly, there are 2 or 3 basic things that both the countries would have to agree on. The first one, of course, would be the opening of Hormuz. The second one would be with opens. Will
Mr. Rizvi, can you hear me? Sorry, your line seems to be going in and out. Can you still hear me? Oh, wow. OK, it looks like we've lost Mr. Rizvi. I really hope that we can go back to him. Hopefully later on in the programme we can get his line back up, because it's quite an interesting topic that we need to stay focused in on, especially as talks are going to be held in Islamabad this weekend. Now, in the meantime, let's turn to Gaza and what is going on there, because an Israeli airstrike has killed 4 people, including a journalist, and that's according to local health authorities. Officials say a drone attack in Gaza City hit a vehicle, killing Al Jazeera journalist Mohammed Bashar and another person. Israel previously accused Bashar of links to Hamas, citing material it said was seized in Gaza, but both Hamas and Al Jazeera rejected the allegation. The Committee to Protect Journalists says more than 220 media workers have been killed across Gaza, Lebanon and Israel since October 2023. Okay, and now let's go back to our guest. We were having technical issues. He's now back with us, Rizvi Osman. Thank you so much for joining me right now. I think we can just pick up from where we left off, if that's okay with you, in regards to talks that will be had this weekend. Hello, Osman, can you hear me? No. Okay, never mind. We will hopefully get that line back up. But let's go to our next story, where we're staying on the conflict in relation to the Middle East, and tensions are still rising between the US and states and NATO. Now, I mentioned this earlier in the press review, but President Donald Trump has criticized the alliance's limited role during the Iran conflict and signaled possible consequences for some member states. Now, our US correspondent sent this in regards to that story.
The Trump administration has blasted the North Atlantic Treaty Organization for not supporting the U.S. during Operation Epic Fury, a military campaign against Iran's missile and nuclear development program that has largely seen NATO on the sidelines. New reports suggest that the Trump administration is considering to punish some NATO members deemed unhelpful during the Iran war, including potentially relocating U.S. military bases from Europe. White House spokeswoman Caroline Leavitt on Wednesday said that President Trump believes that NATO was tested and they failed during the Iran war. That's according to the White House. The increased tensions with NATO come as President Trump and NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte met at the White House. Rutte is known for having a warm relationship with Trump, but the president has been increasingly publicly critical of NATO. In recent weeks, Trump has called NATO a, quote, paper tiger that is unhelpful in times of need. Asked by a reporter earlier this month about withdrawing from the alliance, Trump said, "Wouldn't you if you were me?" Trump's conversation with Rutte was described by officials as being, quote, very frank and candid. Trump has called for countries that depend on oil from the Arabian Gulf region to break Iran's chokehold on the Strait of Hormuz. But European countries are unlikely to join mine clearing or other such missions to free up navigations as long as hostilities continue, according to diplomats. During their private meeting, Rutte expressed a shared interest in restoring normal maritime trade after the conflict caused energy prices to spike globally. The NATO Secretary General is believed to have also highlighted steps that European member states are taking in increasing their defense spending. That's something that Trump has repeatedly been pushing for NATO allies to do more when it comes to burden sharing. Meanwhile, the Trump administration is reportedly considering pulling U.S. troops from NATO allies that refused to support the Iran military campaign and redeploying them to countries that backed U.S. military efforts. I'm Ube Shabander, A News, Washington.
Now, US lawmakers are renewing efforts to limit US President Donald Trump's military actions against Iran as political divisions deepen in Washington. Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer says a vote next week will seek approval for any further strikes. The push follows a 2-week ceasefire announced by Trump hours after warning Tehran over the Strait of Hormuz. Schumer called the approach unhinged, saying it has failed to curb Iran's nuclear program and driven up fuel prices. The White House says Trump acted within his authority, while Republicans back his policy. Now, Bahamian authorities have arrested a 59-year-old man after his wife, 55-year-old Lynette Hooker, went missing at sea over the weekend. He was taken into custody for questioning on Wednesday following a U.S. Coast Guard criminal investigation. Rescue efforts ended Tuesday with only a flotation device found and no sign of Lynette Hooker. He has not been charged, and authorities continue recovery operations as the investigation proceeds. Turning to Europe now, and Greece is preparing to restrict access to social media for children aged under the age of 15. The government says the move is necessary to protect young people's mental health. The decision has sparked mixed reactions, with some supporting the measure and others questioning its effectiveness.
Greece is preparing to ban access to social media for children under the age of 15. The measure will come into force next year.
Science is clear. When a child spends hours in front of a screen, the mind does not rest. That's why we have decided to move forward with something difficult but necessary, to ban access to social media for children under 15. The regulation will be introduced during the summer of 2026 and will come into force on January 1st, 2027. Greece will be among the first countries to take such an initiative. However, I am certain it will not be the last. Our aim is also to push the European Union in this direction.
Mobile phone use has already been banned in schools, and parental control tools have been introduced for teenagers.
As an idea, it seems good to me because young people do not yet have the maturity to judge which of the stimuli they receive is true or not, which will be useful to them and which may harm them.
It should be noted that Australia was the first country to introduce restrictions on social media for users under the age of 16. The ban covers platforms such as TikTok, YouTube, Instagram and Facebook. Technology companies Meta, Snapchat and TikTok have expressed doubts about the effectiveness of such bans, but say they will comply with the rules. Under the new regulations, platforms that fail to enforce user restrictions could face significant financial penalties under the Digital Services Act. Greece's parliament is expected to pass the legislation in mid-2026. Discussions on tightening social media regulations are also ongoing in other countries.
Venezuela's acting president, Delcy Rodriguez, says the government will raise workers' incomes from the 1st of May, linking the move to expected gains in the oil and mining sectors. Here's more.
We must correct our past mistakes. We recognise them, we fix them, and we must not repeat them. I announce that on May 1st we will make an increase, and as we have said, it will be a responsible increase. And in the near future, as Venezuela has more resources that allow for sustainable improvements in wages and workers' income, we will continue moving forward along that path.
A major fire engulfed the roof of the Olympic Park velodrome in Rio de Janeiro's Olympic Park on Wednesday. The fire officials said the blaze was brought under control early that morning, with no injuries reported and no risk of spreading to other parts of the complex. Emergency crews were called to the scene and around 80 firefighters and 20 fire engines deployed to tackle the blaze. The velodrome was built for the 2016 Rio Olympics. Turning to West Africa now, and in Ghana, thousands of people rely on one of Africa's largest salt lagoons for their livelihood. But despite its vast potential, much of this white gold remains underdeveloped.
Salt miners from indigenous communities near Accra's Songor Lagoon have been harvesting what locals call white gold from one of sub-Saharan Africa's largest salt-producing sites. Workers wading through shallow waters, scooping salt into boats, carrying it in buckets and preparing it for transport. For those living in the area, the lagoon is more than just a workplace.
The lagoon you are seeing here is our life. It's our livelihood, our everything. All that we do in Adan comes from this lagoon. When it's time, we don't buy fish. You come here with your nets, you fish, you send it home to get your food.
But the work is far from easy. Harvesters face constant challenges, especially from the weather. Local leaders say the lagoon's full potential remains largely untapped.
If we get like the rain like this, the salt, all the salt will, if you don't add some clay onto it, it will go and we will not get it again. So it's just last week, the rain was raining hard. So some people, all the salt in the lagoon, all the salt in the lagoon is just gone.
Spanning more than 41,000 acres, Songor Lagoon is one of Africa's richest high-quality salt reserves, with the capacity to produce millions of tonnes annually. Yet despite this potential, it remains underdeveloped. Around 50 communities, some 70,000 people depend on small-scale mining, which currently yields only about 250,000 metric tonnes each year.
You're watching Daybreak on A News. We're going to take a quick break. When I return, I'll have more stories. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak with me, Nadia Jani. Now let's turn our attentions to what's going on in Iran and efforts from other countries, especially within the UK. Now tensions in the Gulf remain fragile as world leaders work to secure one of the region's most critical shipping routes, with efforts underway to stabilise the area and ensure global energy supplies. Our correspondent Zainab Faridze reports in Manchester with further details.
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer says there is still a lot of work to do to open the Strait of Hormuz, despite a ceasefire between the United States and Iran. Speaking during a visit to Saudi Arabia, Starmer welcomed the agreement, saying there is a sense of relief following the ceasefire, but he acknowledged it is early days and that efforts are now focused on making it last. He said reopening the key shipping route is critical, not just for the region, but for global energy markets and prices back in the United Kingdom. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the world's most important oil and gas corridors and has been heavily disrupted during weeks of conflict. Starmer is in the Gulf meeting regional leaders in a trip that had been planned before the ceasefire, but is now centered on securing stability and restoring maritime traffic. He told reporters it is the UK's responsibility, alongside allies, to ensure the route is reopened and energy supplies can flow freely again. Donald Trump announced the ceasefire, which has been welcomed internationally, but tensions remain high and questions continue over how quickly normal shipping can resume. Meanwhile, Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper has been in talks with her US counterpart Marco Rubio, discussing diplomatic steps to secure the reopening of the strait and restore confidence in shipping routes. The ceasefire, announced by Washington, has raised hopes of easing tensions, but questions remain over how quickly normal shipping operations can resume. Zainab Faridze, A News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
Now to something a little unnerving. A US police department in Florida responded to what homeowners initially believed was a human intruder on their property during the early hours of the morning in March. However, this so-called human trespasser turned out to be a 9-foot alligator lurking in their pool. Body cam footage captured the moment officers arrived and a specialist successfully wrangled the cold-blooded reptile away from the property. Let's take a look.
There we go.
So he'll just frolic around and then weigh himself out?
Yeah.
Ready? 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. All right, 1, 2, 3.
Just look at the size of that intruder. I think that will freak me out. I think you'd prefer to have someone that's human instead of an alligator in your pool. But anyway, thank you so much for joining me this morning. We are here all day to provide you with updates as to what is taking place across the globe and in the region. So make sure you don't go anywhere and stay tuned to A News.